3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
US Optics is a name that is not new to the channel, nor should it be new to you. This is the SR-4. It is a 1-4 LPVO.
Pew pew pew!
But unlike many other LPVOs that we've experienced throughout the years, this one's special.
Pew pew pew!
For it is not a first focal plane or a second focal plane LPVO. Oh no, it's actually both. You see, there are actually two reticles inside of this thing. One of them is on the first focal plane, which features some little drops, and the other one is on the second focal plane, which features the illumination. So, as we increase the magnification here from 1 to 4x rather slowly, you could see the drops change size.
Pew!
But the reticle with the illumination on it remains the same size. This is pretty friggin' awesome.
Pew!
However, when you can find one of these available, whether it's new or used, because these are slightly discontinued, they're not cheap.
Pew pew! Pew!
New, these things were around $2,000, and I was able to find one or two websites that claim they have them in stock, but I did not reach out to them to confirm it. But nevertheless, this is an excellent piece of technology by a very good American-made company that we need to investigate further. So with all that being said, let's do a quick unboxing.
Pew pew! Pew pew pew!
My experience with the US Optics boxes have been like this. Very simple, plain Jane, and as cheap as possible. But that just meant to me that all of their money went into the scope development and manufacturing processes. All the information you're going to need to know is on the outside of the box, and well, that's really all there is to it. There really isn't a whole lot on the inside of the box either, but again, it's designed to be simple and effective. I believe the SR-4C, as seen here, was still made in California. USO went from California to Montana to one of the Carolinas, and that's where they've been producing scopes ever since. This, I believe, came out in the early 2010s, so it's probably 14 or so years old now, which is hard to believe. Despite its age, though, it's in great shape, and I did send this into US Optics to get a clean bill of health. USO, with their warranty work and their customer service, is absolutely top notch. They are amazing. But let's throw this up on the scale and see what this 1-4 comes in at. Well, a very heavy 19 ounces. To show a quick comparison, the Gen 2 PST 1-6 comes in at 23.5 ounces, so still about 4 ounces heavier, but it's a much larger scope with more magnification. So how could this be as heavy as it is? Really good materials, very thick materials, and a lot of glass. Anyway, the fast focus eyepiece on this thing has insanely aggressive knurling and is super tight. There is zero, I mean zero wiggle to it. It's as good as you can really get for a fast focus eyepiece. The magnification ring on this, however, shows why it took me so long to go from 1x to 4x in the beginning. It is over 200 degrees to go from 1x to 4x. It is the largest sweep of any magnification ring I've ever seen, and I can't explain it. The only good thing about the magnification ring on this is that it has excellent knurling on it, just like the fast focus eyepiece. The Mark III HD 1.5-4 is a prime example of how you do a magnification ring properly on any optic. Very short sweeps, very tight controls, and makes going from minimum to max magnification insanely easy and fast, especially when you have a giant throw lever like what's included on those. They are truly awesome. If you want a throw lever on this thing, you're going to have to go with an aftermarket solution. At least the knurling is very aggressive on this thing, as are all of the knurled surfaces. One way that this thing weighs as much as it does is very high quality materials. I've already mentioned that numerous times, and one way you can see that is with the knurling. Knurling is only able to really be done on harder materials. Soft, crappy aluminums don't take knurling very well, which is why you typically don't see a lot of knurling on cheaper optics. USO opts for push-button illuminations on a lot of their scopes, and understandably so. A lot of people prefer push buttons over rheostats or turn dials because they're typically a little bit more quote-unquote robust. However, I've had some issues with my USO push buttons in the past on some of my other scopes, which I'll pull out momentarily. But let me show you what's going inside with this thing. So you have two contacts on the body of the scope itself, and then you have these two little pins to help line that up, both with the scope body and then those two little contact pins right there that make contact with the body to have it function properly. It seems like a very well thought out and simple enough system, but it's a real pain in the butt to try to get everything to line up properly. I found the best thing to do is put the battery on it, put the button on it, and then take that knurled cap and screw it onto it. One thing that I didn't like with my fixed 10x BFX10 was that every time you would go adjust the parallax, it would rotate that button a little bit, and then it would lose contact, and then it would shut off. It's really not a very thought out device here with a side parallax, but on the LPVO, it's not as bad. The hardest part with the illumination is getting the button back in place like this. Once you get it lined up and you get the cap on, it's not so bad. At least the button on this thing has a very tactical feel and sound, and it's very easy to make adjustments with it. Under the caps, you will see some very nice looking turrets. These are very simple turrets. They are in 0.2 of a mil increment, so every click is a 0.2 increase as opposed to a 0.1 increase, something to keep note of. And again, we see very good knurling on both the windage and the elevation turrets. The way that you would reset your zero is you'd get them dialed in, you'd loosen up those two screws, turn the dial, and then lock them back up, and you're good to go. These are non-locking nor zero stopped, but on an LPVO like this, where it's designed to be set and forget, they're perfectly adequate. So see, make it make more sense to me. How does this thing function with two reticles going on at the same time? Well, part of the reason why this thing was so expensive to begin with is because they have to have two reticles lined up perfectly, one on the first focal plane and one on the second focal plane. As we increase the magnification here, you will see that the outside posts at 3, 6, 9, and 12, the larger ones did increase scale, as well as the small milling section in the middle. Those are all on the first focal plane. But the small lines, the finer crosshair, is where the actual illumination is being held up from. So as we dial back the magnification from 4 to 1x, you'll see that the first focal plane reticle changes scaling appropriately, but the dot does not change sizes. This is very complicated because you have to have two reticles that are perfectly lined up all the time and that will withstand shock and abuse and not shift. But it's great because you have all the benefits of a second focal plane, very bright dot in an LPVO, and have the adjustable scaling for a more precise holdover at any magnification. It really is the best of both worlds. As far as cap turrets on an LPVO go, these are some of the best. They sound good, they feel good, and they're very tight. Overall, they are excellent. Given this is only a 4x on the top end, tracking it was going to be very difficult to actually see. However, from what I was able to accomplish with trying to track this thing, it seemed to track very good, maybe within 1 or 2%, with no slop in any of the turrets. Externally, this USO is excellent. Wonderful materials, wonderful controls. You really can't ask for much more out of any scope, even at this price point. But playing around with it on a desk and looking through it on a gun are two totally different things. So what does this thing look like to actually use? Well, great and mediocre all at the same time. It's a wonderful mix of meh, and let's get into it. There is very little fisheye at 1x. It's actually very flat, but the view looking through this thing is rather small. And the scope body that we see, well, that's rather huge. It is definitely on the larger side of the spectrum, if not the largest that we've looked at so far. For many of you, that'll be a huge turnoff. For others, it'll be a non-issue. And for some of you, you weirdos, you'll actually prefer seeing more scope body. I am of the camp of less is sometimes more, but I'm fine to have a little bit here and there, depending on the magnification of the scope. The 1X is very true to form. It looks like a true, legitimate 1X, but there is some pulling to the image. You could see the power lines on the top part of the image. They are higher looking through the scope than what is actually representative on the outside. I turned the illumination on full and then accidentally go over because it's actually 9 brightness settings, not 10. And I can't seem to memorize that because I have a lizard brain sometimes. When the illumination is on full, it is red dot bright. The flickering that you see is just the refresh rate of the emitter and my camera, nothing more. To the naked eye, I had no issues with this. To some people that are very, very sensitive to refresh rates, you might notice it, but I highly doubt it, all things considered. So if the 1X is good, hopefully the 4X is good, and at least here at 30 yards on our very old power transformer, how I miss you so sometimes, it's a decent enough image, but not really great. There have been a lot of other 1 to 4s that have performed much better at this distance. However, odds are you're going to be using the maximum magnification at more extended distances, like this 400-yard brick building that used to be my go-to for filming. God, I miss you too. It's been a long time. The center part of the image, I think, looks exceptional. The colors are very true to form, as is the color tone of the image. It is as true to one in real life as you could possibly get. However, at the higher magnifications, there is some pulling to the image on the outside edge. Look at the outside edge as I slowly ramp up the magnification. You'll eventually get to a point where the outside of the image sort of dissolves a little bit, and I'm not a huge fan of that. In fact, it's like half of the view looking through it. It's only really noticeable around 3.5 to 4x. Below that, it's a non-issue. But here, it might be a nuisance for some of you. However, the parts that you might actually need to actually use, aka the center part of the reticle, is very, very sharp and clear. Excellent glass inside these USO SR-10-4s, and it shows. So the party trick to this dual focal plane reticle is you will notice the illumination anywhere, at any magnification, at any time. As far as the image stability, I think it's quite good. Given the fact that this is a very old scope, it performs this test and passes with flying colors. At least at 4x. Let's back the magnification down to 2x and see if the image will hold up when we start going slightly off center. Oh dear, oh my. Notice how quickly both the reticle and the target's downrange go from razor sharp to soft like melted butter in the summer when we're not perfectly behind it. It's still a decent performance, but it gets real bad real quick once you hit a certain point off axis. 1X does the exact same thing here, and this is something that really bothers me. It bothers me more than fisheye. It bothers me more than a tight eyebox. It's so distracting when you get behind this thing and you're especially when you're transitioning from one target to another really quickly. If your eye shifts a little bit behind the scope, which is very possible, even with a perfect cheek weld, everything's just going to get fuzzy and soft. And for me, it's really distracting and pulls me out of the experience right away. There's a lot to like about this setup. At 1x here, you can see you could really get far away from it. You can choke up on it a little bit. It's not as forgiving as a lot of other LPVOs, even in the 1 to 6 category, but the illumination is wonderful. But you can see, even here, that center part of the image gets soft. It doesn't get distorted. The distortion is actually extremely minimal, one of the best, but it just falls. It seems to fall apart sharpness-wise, which to me is a real bother. At 2x, the Eyebox is again very large as far as giving you leeway to get away from it. Even side to side is pretty good, but it's not really all that usable. 4x is probably this thing's best performance. Even though it seems pretty tight side to side, which it is, at least the image maintains a high level of sharpness. You can't really get too far away from it or choke up on too much of it because it does start to get real shadowy really quickly, but at least that illumination draws your eye to the center. All in all, it's really not great. I must maintain, however, this is still a very old optic, at least 14 years old if I had to put a number on it. So there are going to be some issues that can come about from older optics. That's just one of them. Take note of the bottom left part of that roof. It's nice and bright, but when we bring the scope back over, it gets much, much darker. The low light performance on this was nothing to write home about. I actually felt it was quite poor. The illumination on this thing is truly excellent, but I do not like push button illumination on every type of scope. I think for an LPVO like this, a rotary dial rheostat is just a better option for being able to get it to where you want it more confidently and quicker. But again, that is a personal preference of mine. At least here at 4x, we didn't lose any more brightness to the image, but it's still nowhere near as bright as something like, let's say, the P4XI. If you think that this is a horrible 1-4 experience, just remember it's not the first time you and I have experienced such a bad 1-4 experience in the past. The Trijicon TR24 1-4x24 was the worst experience I've had behind a scope. I'm saying that with full confidence. They're Japanese made. Externally, they feel incredible. The controls are stellar. They're expensive. They're $600 plus. They come with great tritium reticles and all this other jazz. They're great until you get behind it and you try to actually use it, and the image looks like this. No, there was nothing wrong with this scope. This is just how, in my findings of TR24s or even Credo 1-4s, this is how they look. They look like that. Really, really bad. Nothing else to really say. This USO, by comparison to the TR24, outclasses it in every way, shape, or form. If I had to guess, the TR24 is around the same age as the USO SR-4 as far as overall vintage, but the USO is absolutely eating this thing's lunch. What do I recommend here? Well, neither, to be brutally honest, but we'll get more into why I wouldn't recommend the USO for a lot of reasons in a moment. But the TR24 is just an example to showcase that this is not the first time we've had a 1-4 that has really missed a couple of steps. It is horrible. I mean, look at that image. They let that go to the public for decades like that. Oh man, it really perplexes me. USO at 200 yards, at 300 yards, insanely sharp image towards the center at 4x, and those colors are beautiful, bright, and vibrant. They are awesome. USO glass really can be excellent when it's an American-made scope. From a bad 1-4 to perhaps my favorite 1-4. Actually, no, this is definitely my favorite 1-4. It's a scope that I still use to this day, even though it was the first scope I ever reviewed 6-7 years ago now. Time really does wait for no one. Anyway, the Steiner P4XI 1-4x24 is $700-800 now, which is a lot of money. They are made in the US. I believe they do run Scotch glass. They're supremely nice overall second focal plane LPVOs. I think for its overall design and setup, it is about as good as you could possibly get. The reticle is also one of my favorites. It's super fast even without illumination, but when you use that oh so excellent center dot bright illumination, it really does make this thing function like a red dot at 1x. We have a very nice amount of scope body that we see through the P4, much less than with the USO, but not razor good. But I don't necessarily need razor good. I would like to, but at least the P4 is on the more minimal side. As far as colors, sharpness, and overall image quality of the P4 goes, it is very, very good. But I do think on the minutia end of things, the USO on center is a little bit sharper and maybe a little bit clearer. I also think I prefer the colors in the USO, but I prefer everything else to the P4XI. Another thing I really like about the P4 is it's just a simpler setup scope. Having a dual focal plane reticle is really, really awesome. I think it's wild that they were able to put it in a 1:4 like this. But the question is, why would they bother putting it into 1:4 like this? Why wouldn't you put this into like a 1.8:10 like they produce that doesn't have illumination like this? Like, that makes way more sense to me. But, you know, I just don't get it. But anyway, I'll touch on that more in the final thoughts. As far as these two side by side, well, considering the P4XI is still the only one that you can get from these two, it is hands down the winner. But even if both of these were available right now today, it would still be the P4XI by a long shot. So you want a first focal plane LPVO that isn't $2,000 and it's still really good. Well, if you wanted a first focal plane 1:6, the best one that I could really come to think of is the SLx. It is optically superior to a lot of different scopes out there. It's got a pretty good reticle, even though I'd love to see a more traditional-ish style reticle as seen with the USO would come out to market. I don't know what is the deal with a lot of these companies coming up with these reticles that don't extend the full size of the view looking through these scopes at 1x. I don't like that trend. In fact, it's a trend that I would love to partition against, but I have no power for that. But if you're looking for a first focal plane scope that's going to offer the best of what you can get in a first focal plane LPVO, at least in the 1:6 form, the SLx is a very awesome scope. Optically, it is gorgeous. Build quality is gorgeous. Illumination isn't fully daytime bright, but the reticle at the higher magnifications doesn't really require illumination to be functional. And as far as drops go, it makes way more sense to have the reticle on the SLx as opposed to the USO. You can see the drops. You can actually use the drops. Whereas with the USO, it's like, this could have just been a second focal plane scope and probably saved a lot of headaches for a lot of different people. Nevertheless, if you really want a first focal plane lower powered LPVO 1:4 1:6 experience, the SLx is easily the one I would recommend to anybody looking for it. Would I recommend that over something else? Not really. I still think in 1:4 and 1:6 form, second focal plane makes way more sense, especially when the illumination is as good as on a lot of the scopes that we see. And unfortunately, with first focal plane scopes in the 1:4, 1:6 category, they don't function anywhere near as good as a second focal plane of equal magnification. But if you're looking for a first focal plane 1:6 or 1:4, the SLx is the one that you should absolutely buy. Last but not least, the Primary Arms SLx NOVA second focal plane 1:6. Ironically, the reticle on the NOVA looks kind of sort of similar to what we see with the P4XI and kind of sort of similar to what we see with the USO when it's at maximum magnification. Almost like that's all you really need in a LPVO. Why am I introducing the SLx? It's a very inexpensive scope. 8 times less expensive than the USO. Readily available. Second focal plane only. Made in China. Overall, nowhere near the same level of build quality as the USO. But optically, the SLx is exceptionally good. Look at that image right there. Between these two, I give it to the SLx, especially overall, because at maximum magnification, the image is flat from edge to edge. It's sharp from edge to edge. Sure, the SLx has a couple of minor shortcomings here and there, but overall, it's almost impossible to beat. I really like the SLx. I've recommended it to a lot of people. I think I still prefer the PST Gen 2 1:6 a little bit more for some reasons for me, but for 99.9% of the population, the SLx NOVA is unbeatable. And I'm only rolling this in to showcase that technology's come a long way. Just because you're buying something that once cost $2,000 and was made in California, I believe, doesn't necessarily mean you're getting something that's going to perform at the highest level for today's standards. When the Chinese are capable of producing a scope that looks like this and functions as good as the SLx for $300 retail price, it really opens your eyes to how much has changed over the last decade or so. This was a rather odd video for me to make. I really love looking at older scopes. I love reviewing, buying, and playing with older scopes. This is clearly discontinued. A lot of other scopes that I've done full reviews on have been discontinued. And I know that this video is going to do poor as far as view count goes, but I don't care because I really enjoy getting my hands on a piece of history like this and playing around with it and running it and seeing how it works and seeing how much things have changed in a very short amount of time. The biggest question I have for US Optics, if you're watching this video, is why? Why did you bother making this scope in the first place? Why would you make a 1:4 dual focal planes? Why? Why wouldn't you do that with the 1.8 to 10, where it would make so much more sense? Or a 1:8, or a 1:10? I just don't get it. Maybe they were just looking to spend money. Maybe they were looking to develop the technology and really start to implement it, but it was just too expensive or too costly to maintain. I'm not too sure. Nor do I know if I'll ever know the answer. I hope to one day, but for right now, it makes me scratch my head as to why they would even want to develop this in the first place. I really wanted to roll this video out before I roll out a newer video very soon, which features the exact same technology. And I wanted to get this out of the way so this way you can have a reference point with technology of old versus technology of new in a scope that costs even more than this did when it was brand new. Overall, I have to say USO as a company has been amazing to work with. I really like their American-made products, even if they do have shortcomings. Build quality on all of them has felt really, really high. The materials feel insanely good, and a lot of the controls have been stellar. There are some misses here and there, most notably the BFX10. That side parallax and the push-button illumination just doesn't jive well, but I'm sure that they could fix that very easily if they wanted to. Could I recommend someone buying this? Absolutely. If you wanted to build a gun of the early G-Wide era and you were looking for something that was absolutely special and unique, you can't get much more of either than what the scope offers. It really is something special and something that I really enjoyed playing around with, using, and reviewing. It just boggles my mind, and that's part of the reason why I love it so much, even though I would never want to buy one. Anyway, with all that being said, a huge thank you to the individual for sending this into review, and a huge thank you for all of you for watching and staying tuned as long as you have. Again, thank you very much. I'll see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe Star subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.